morning, going from one damn good guest to another. We are joined with the man himself, Mark Sleboda. Mark Sleboda is International Relations Security Analyst. Mark, oh, by the way, you can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty, Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda, or you can just put in his name. Both will bring him up. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay this morning? Well, this afternoon?
Tomorrow. Thanks for having me on the show. It's always an honor and a pleasure. And I'm alive. How are you?
I am also alive. I'm doing well. Mark, I have been watching, let's start with Pokrovsk, I think is the way it's pronounced. Can you give us some idea of why that's significant?
About why it's significant?
Yes, because it seems to be falling. Russia has completely invaded Ukraine, doesn't seem to have the manpower in order to maintain it. From my understanding, looking at the map, it's a logistics hub, or at the very least, it used to be a logistics hub.
Yeah.
Ukrainian troops are seemingly pulling out, or at the very least, in some parts, are pulling out. Give us an understanding of its significance, or does it remain significant? Have they removed this as a logistic hub as they saw it collapsing?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, it effectively no longer functions as a logistic hub, right? Certainly within the last month, because what Russian forces did in the south central Donbass is they moved in and they began the process, a months-long process of putting Pokrovsk effectively under siege. And as part of that, they wiped out everything else in the south central Donbass. So first Sleboda, then Karahava, these other that were logistic nodes of lesser significance than Pokrovsk, but still important on a strategic level. And they slowly isolated all of the remaining villages, towns, and settlements in the area from Pokrovsk, took those out. And now what we see is within the last 2 or 3 weeks, Russia has tightened the noose, and Pokrovsk came under operational encirclement. And what that means is that all of the supply lines going into Krovsk are either physically cut off, or they are under heavy fire from Russian artillery and drone strikes, drone capability. And now, within the last week, Russia has quite unexpectedly broken through the Kiev regime defenses north of the city in a very wide, deep, and penetrating flanking maneuver, which is effectively threatening Pokrovsk with physical encirclement, a tantamount to it, not 100%, but to a very large degree. It's separating the battlefield between Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka, with Russian forces, straight up the middle and the rear. And at this point, even Kiev regime sources have admitted, as you point out, they don't have the manpower left to defend Pokrovsk. As of last week, Russian diversion and reconnaissance groups were operating from within central Pokrovsk. They had obviously penetrated the city. They were conducting ambushes on Kiev regime forces from within the center of the city, and we have video evidence of that, right? I mean, this is something that Kiev regime forces, have and interlocutors on social media have grudgingly admitted. Of course, there's not really much commentary about any of this in the Western media, because they don't want to talk about how bad the situation is there. Now, as to what happens when Pokrovsk is gone, because already it's ceased to function as a logistics hub, but of course, it's also important to remove it from the table completely. But once it's gone completely, having already accomplished the removal of its ability to serve as a logistic hubs for the rest of the Kiev regime forces in the Donbass region. It also now opens up a whole new swath of territory behind it, where there are no further significant strongholds further deep and north into the Dnepropetrovsk region to the west of it. Essentially all the way, to near the banks of the Dnieper River, right? So it's going to lead to Russian forces essentially, then moving in concentrated force, north to take care of Konstantinovka, the southernmost of the Kiev regime's last defensive line. But also they'll then be pushing much further and deeper west into the Dnepropetrovsk region across a much wider front. And the Dnepropetrovsk region is going to be imperiled to a speed and degree that we never saw in the Donbass, right? Yeah. Because they don't have the decade of built-up defenses, and also the topography, the terrain. It's not this hilly area with these built-up urban agglomerations. It's essentially steppe, and that will heavily favor an offense which not only has logistical and vehicle superiority, but also has complete air dominance over the territory as well. So Dnepropetrovsk is going to be rolled up much faster than what we've become used to in this conflict. Once the Russians are, shall we say, focused on it. At the moment, yes, we've seen penetrations further south from Pokrovsk into the Dnepropetrovsk region, but that's it's still on a relatively small scale because the priority in this direction remains the Donbass area. But this is going to set things up for probably next spring. There is a strong possibility that Russia will be able to finish up or all but finish up the Kiev regime's last defensive positions in the Donbass, the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka line by the end of the year. And then they'll have everything essentially up to the Dnepropetrovsk region in the Donbass area, right up to the Dnepropetrovsk. And also Russian forces have begun pushing from the south in the Zaporozhye region as well. So basically the whole south of Ukraine, east of the Dnieper River, is going to come under a two-pronged attack sometime next year, which basically means cleaning everything on the east bank of the left bank, the east bank of the Dnieper River.
But if they don't have enough troops in order to maintain Pokrovsk, you don't believe in a military collapse. You think
not like most people think. Not like we just can't fight anymore. We're going to sign papers and that's going to be it. No, I think you will see more localized crumbling. You will see the Kiev regime no longer able to defend and no longer trying to defend everywhere, because at the moment they're still largely trying to defend everywhere, right? Russian forces are for the first time now discovering stretches of the front where there are no troops, towns where there are no troops, right? That is really the first time in the past few weeks that Russian forces have done that. That is an increasing sign of what will be identified in the future as a collapse. But it's not like some people just think the war will, one day it'll collapse and that'll be it and the war will be over. It's not going to be like that. I don't believe it's going to be like that. Unfortunately, I think that they will continue fighting with what forces they are able, with what supplies they are able to get from the West to the bitter end. And that will mean Kiev and beyond. But we're still quite a ways away from that.
From the Russian point of view, and I want to move from this, but I'm just curious. From the Russian point of view, though, if they're seeing this level of collapse, where the Ukrainian military doesn't have the capability of defending various towns and areas, Petrovsk is a really good example. And the reason why I'm focusing on this is because this was a stronghold. This was something that they wanted to militarily defend, and it's clear that they don't have the troops to defend.
Oh, they've already started suddenly Pokrovsk is no longer strategically important, and all the usual copes in the Western media and the social media commentary. But that's nothing Russia ever takes in Ukraine has ever had strategic importance, according to them.
I'm trying to point out, though, if they can't defend this, and it's something that they want to defend, and this is going to be something that happens more and more, then you're just looking at a retreat at this point.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, a fighting retreat. It's still it has to be said, right? Pokrovsk has held for months, right? I mean, Russia didn't take it head on. They encircled it. They're doing the smart thing to minimize their own casualties while doing so, and stretching the Kiev regime forces' defensive capabilities out further, which helps hasten the attrition, right? But right now, what we're seeing with this deep penetrating maneuver, this isn't quite what the West, in their military doctrine thinks of as maneuver warfare. But I think it's, the closest we've seen in this conflict, at least since the early days of it, right? It is a deep penetration into the rear. And it's a sign of how things are going to develop into the future. That we'll see more and more such circumstances where Russia is able to operate deeper. And again, part of the reason they're able to do this is because of their superiority in both manpower and logistics.
Do you think they stop at a certain point, or do they keep going?
I don't see the capability. This regime I don't see stopping. And they have now developed, let's just take a look at
Wait, just to be clear, what I mean is Russia.
Russia.
Do they chase them to the point of saying, we're going to destroy the military, in which case we need to keep going in order to destroy the military?
Yeah.
Or do they say, we've liberated the South, or we've liberated the Donbass and Lugansk, we've established a buffer, and we're going to stop here?
That doesn't meet no, I don't think so. That does not meet the goals that have been so clearly and so many times articulated. That meets a number of the goals of the special military operation, but it doesn't ensure that Ukraine never enjoys NATO and never joins NATO. It doesn't fully denazify or debanderize Ukraine. It substantially accomplishes, but does not ensure the demilitarization of Ukraine into the future. Right? That can only be met by either a political settlement or by complete removal of the regime by physical means. And I think the simply Russia does not want to occupy all of Ukraine. That has never been the goal of this, and it still is what the Kremlin does not want, and I think fears. But they are being left no alternative by the Kiev regime and its Western backers. Right? They will simply have to take everything, because otherwise the active phase will never.
Last question, Kaliningrad. I have to hit that before it goes. Every accusation is a confession. I've said that more than once. Yeah. This talk about 2027, China is going to take Taiwan, Russia is going to invade NATO, and it's going to happen in 2027. Okay, every accusation is a confession. That is my prevailing hypothesis on this stuff. Do you think, and of course there was the military general who said something to the effect that we can invade Kaliningrad before Russia can respond to the fact that we can invade Kaliningrad, we can do it by land, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, and show all of these charts or whatever. Is that something?
How many tactical nukes does that general want parked in his backyard?
Exactly. Yeah, because that's what Russia's effectively said, that if you try to take our territory, we will strike. Like
whatever is necessary, right?
Yes.
First of all, I don't believe they could conventionally take Kaliningrad within, the scope that they're talking, right? Certainly not without Russian forces overrunning all of the Baltics before they successfully take over Kaliningrad, right?
Yeah.
But if the Americans were landing hundreds of thousands of troops, right, to back the Europeans up, then Russia would use nukes to defend their territory. Yes, they would, right? Absolutely. I don't see still much action on this, but there is a current line of thinking within, shall we say, the European elite and the American, blob that is still largely in line with them, that, okay, they're losing this war now, but it is just part of a larger war. And we can keep Ukraine fighting and dying for another few years until we're ready to fight Russia ourselves, right? 2027, 2028, 2030, whatever it is. They think they can keep Ukraine on life support until then. And then that is when they all talk, right? How many European leaders? We will be at war with Russia in a few years. Now, that war is not going to be what they say it is. Russia's not going to invade Poland or Lithuania or any Baltics country or anything themselves. Where this is going, and I don't believe that they're going to just out of the blue invade Kaliningrad either. They're going to put troops in Ukraine, in whatever's left of Ukraine, west of the Dnieper, in Galicia, Odessa, right, Lvov, or potentially within Moldova, right? Or there will be another attempt to overthrow the government in Belarus, although that's an outside possibility at this point. But then they'll be putting forces in to back their chosen president for Belarus, Tikhanovskaya, or whoever. That is where the potential for conflict is. It's still the gray areas that exist between the last buffer zones between Russia and NATO, right? Even particularly because NATO is pissing all over them, claiming it as NATO geopolitical territory. We heard the last NATO Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg, repeatedly claim there are no gray zones anymore. There are no more neutral countries. That's not acceptable to them, right? All the neutral countries, Finland, Sweden, there's now a push to bring Austria into NATO. And of course, they mean the same thing for Moldova and Ukraine and Belarus and Georgia. And I don't know, maybe even Armenia, right? They will surround Russia. That's the goal. That's the RAND Corporation's pressure cooker strategy, right? I mean, to a T. That is where the conflict will break out. Now, of course, it won't just stop there, but I think they're still looking that they can keep Russia, at the wolf's door in Ukraine for another 2 or 3 years, and then they can move troops in at the end to defend Kiev or Lvov or whatever it is. And that's where the real danger of that war breaks out. Now, that concerns me a great deal. And by then, Joe Biden may be gone, right? That's the idea, or the hope, or more firmly under control or whatever. But where I still take I still regard this as fantasy and smack talking to a degree, because I see no organized rebuilding of a unified European military industrial complex, or the rebuilding of the military itself in Europe in manpower terms, right? Their militaries are deteriorated to such a point where Russia's not afraid of them anymore, right? They will have to bring in large amounts of new people into the military, whether through drafts, as Germans keep talking about but haven't enacted so far, right? Other countries, Sweden, restarted the draft, but you'll need to see a lot more of that. They'll need to build up powerful officer corps, right? A professional military class. I just don't see any of that happening. And until then, They may have fantasies that they're able to militarily confront Russia in Ukraine or Moldova or wherever, but they're not. And Russia understands that. So at the moment, it is still ideational rather than a organized plan. But the very fact that there are some of them, and some very powerful ones, are thinking of it and trying to move things in that direction should be terrifying, right? Because
it's 2027 when they think the military of Ukraine is going to collapse, and that's why this keeps coming up. Like
that's a number that they've fixated on recently. I've seen other ones put it off till 2030, mentioned, but yeah, in the last couple of weeks, 2027 has popped up a couple of times. But again, they've been talking about this for half a year or more now, right?
Yeah. When I saw the Kaliningrad thing, that's where it piques my interest. Where it's like,
yeah, of course. Russians immediately, that's NATO talking about taking over Russian territory, right? I mean, of course, it draws not only attention from the Kremlin, but it draws attention from the Russian media and the Russian public as well.
Mark, you are fantastic, as always. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty. You can put in Realpolitik, Mark Sleboda, or just Mark Sleboda. His name will come up. Check him out. Support his content. Support his work. Mark has been fantastic. He's a great friend of the show. You have my deepest appreciation, Mark. By the way, also on Twitter, at Mark Sleboda1. You can check him out. Have a good one, Mark. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Mark Sleboda is fantastic. Mark Sleboda is fantastic. Man, he knows his stuff. Mark Sleboda is